Okay, welcome everyone. Glad to have you all here. Welcome to today's installment of Focus St. Louis's ongoing Community Forum series. I'm Dr. Wally Seward. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement for Focus St. Louis. It is my great privilege to welcome you all into this space on behalf of Focus St. Louis, on behalf of our panelists and our moderator, and on behalf of our sponsor for these forums, the Incarnate Word Foundation. Thank you so much for coming today. Before we begin, I just want to make one quick announcement. We're pretty excited about this over here at Focus. On May 12th, mark the day in your calendars, Focus's biggest annual event is back in person for the first time in several years. The 25th annual What's Right with the Region Awards are back. If you've never been, it's an unbelievably inspirational evening of seeing what's working, who are doing amazing things in the St. Louis region. So that's May 12th. It's bigger than ever. We have some new categories for awards. And as an extra special bonus, we have a 25th anniversary after party at the Public Media Commons. So join us for What's Right with the Region on May 12th. The format for this afternoon's discussion will be a panel discussion led by our moderator, followed by Q&A from the audience. So as the audience as the conversation progresses, please put your questions into the Q&A feature or the chat, and we'll bring those questions to our panel toward the end of the session. Also feel free, and I see some folks doing that already, to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat to your fellow participants. That's one of the things we don't get to do virtually, is kind of mix and mingle with our fellow audience members. So feel free to do that. The subject for today's forum is choosing our environment, by which we mean all the different ways in which we shape the space, the resources, and the living things that surround us in our communities. Our discussion today will be wide-ranging because this is a huge subject. The panelists have been chosen for their variety of deep perspectives on these issues. However, I want to acknowledge that their subject is so huge, there will be parts of this story that we are not going to get to today. The discussion is designed as an entry point and an update on some of the biggest challenges we face in our region when it comes to our environment and our choices. And we're hoping it whets your appetite for deeper involvement. So without further delay, let me introduce our moderator, Louise. Louise Bradshaw is the Fred Side Director of Education at the St. Louis Zoo. As a graduate of both St. Louis University and the University of Missouri St. Louis, Louise has worked around the world and engages in conservation work all across the nation as a member of the National Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Welcome, Louise. Thank you, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation, so I'm going to turn off my camera and let you take it away. And to the audience members, if you want to, on your view, switch to hide non-video participants, then you'll just be able to see the folks participating in the conversation today. Louise, take it away.
Thank you, Wally, and good afternoon, everyone. This is just such an exciting afternoon we're going to have together, learning some really wonderful things that are going on. Meeting some wonderful people who are really doing some substantive work here. So I'm so excited to be here with you all. I would like to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Leah Clyburn. Leah is the Beyond Coal organizer for the Sierra Club. And we're going to have each of our panelists give a little bit more information about themselves. And then we have a question for each panelist as you come on and share yourself with us. You each have such a unique perspective on environmental issues in the region. From your perspective and area of expertise, how can we better care for our environment here in the St. Louis region? So Leah, please take it away. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Louise, for having me here, and Focus St. Louis for inviting me. Yeah, so in working in St. Louis, I've been an organizer here for over 10 years from so many different angles, trying to find ways of bringing all residents in our city and in our state together around issues that impact us all. Actually, I'm the former Beyond Coal organizer with the senior organizer with Sierra Club, and I just recently transitioned in my role as the senior training partner. So I work with partners all across the organization nationwide, as well as partners locally to address these issues and find skills and techniques to build up the momentum to get out and get our voices heard. I think one of the things that really is momentous and important in this process, in this movement, is the asking the question of why, right? Like, why is this happening? Why don't we have this anymore? And why don't we have policy to, protect and supply, right? So often, we I use the analogy of what happened after high school or what happened after middle school, right? Like we grow up as children, we start off as small children and we're encouraged to ask questions. So, if you talk to a 2-year, like, what's that? What's this? What's that? And also we're encouraged to say, if something's wrong, go find someone to help you fix it. Well, we stopped doing that. And so as a community organizer, getting all community members to get clear that something's going on, they're not crazy. And the same thing that you think you're seeing that's happening to you it is happening to your neighbors. So let's go talk and let's build something together so that we can identify what is at the core of the issue and work together across all party lines, across all races and sex, and all different kinds of identity and religions, to say, like, I live here, it is our right and responsibility to speak up and speak out. And whether if it is reaching out to our legislation, to our local government, or just to companies and industry that are looking for our dollars, to say, look, if you're going to be a good partner, good representative for us, this is what this means, and this is what I expect of you. And our environment, our environment is our job as human beings on this earth to protect, to be good stewards of. And so this is what I see as a thriving opportunity to get everybody together. I like to call, like, at a cookout, and really have a deep conversation and get clear about what we can do and figure out ways that we can do it together. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Leah. I love that. Ask the why, figure out what's going on, realize that others in your community are facing the same challenges, and speak up and speak out. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bob Criss. Dr. Criss is professor at Washington University, hydrogeologist, and a fantastic regional expert on flooding and floodplain management, something that is a significant issue here in our region. Dr. Criss.
Yes, am I on the screen?
You are.
Oh, okay. I'm just not seeing it. But that's all fine. Yes, I'm Bob Criss, Professor Emeritus of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Washington University. I'm retired, but I actually work every day because I like what I do. As a natural scientist, I work with big data sets, and I work with mathematical models that describe those data sets. Even this year, I've probably published 5 papers already. Most of them are on rivers. I have a new method for flood inundation mapping. I have a new time scale for watersheds. It helps us better appreciate the dynamics of the flood process. I've also worked on global tectonics, global heat flow, and thermodynamics this year. So I'm all over the place, but I actually spend about half my time studying floods because I think it's very important. And when it comes to floods, we've actually lost track of our rivers that are so important to our region. Rivers are our friend. They're not something that we should be fighting. We should be learning to better get along with rivers. And other than that theme, and I'm glad to address questions today, but other than the theme of how we get along with rivers, it's the old adages are important, is to not everything you hear is believable. And the other thing is follow the money. And I think with that admonition, you will come to understand a heck of a lot about how we deal with our rivers and what's the matter with our current approach and why we're so often victimized by rivers when it's really much our own fault.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Criss. That was a really great summary. Our climate models for the region show wetter and warmer. And we've definitely been experiencing that these past few years, and it's likely to get even worse. I really love the way you said we've lost track of our rivers. We certainly, Missouri and St. Louis was founded because of the confluence of these two rivers, and rivers are our friends. So, and follow the money, of course. That's very critical. Thank you so much. Next, it'd be great if we could hear from Heather Navarro. Heather is the executive director of the brand new Midwest Climate Collaborative and also a former St. Louis City Alderperson. Heather, welcome.
Thank you, Louise. It's great to be here today with everybody. And as you said, I'm with the newly formed Midwest Climate Collaborative. We formed at the end of January after a couple of years of summits and think tank series, bringing people together across our 12-state region. And our vision is a carbon neutral, climate resilient, interconnected Midwest region. And we are working towards that through a cross-sector collaboration of higher ed institutions, nonprofits, local governments, corporations across our 12-state region to connect researchers, practitioners, and community groups to amplify what's working, all in support of accelerating climate action here in the Midwest. And I would say the two foundational concepts behind all of this work and how we are going to be successful is one, connecting with one another, and I don't mean on Twitter, and two, appreciating our natural resources and the tremendous assets that we have in this region to address climate change and build our resiliency. And I think the connecting piece is so important, whether it's rural, suburban, urban, whether it is from Minnesota to Missouri, Ohio to Kansas, whether we're talking about First Nations. There's so many different groups that represent and live in the Midwest, call the Midwest home. And until we start to really truly understand the perspective of all of these folks, understand the values that people bring to the table, we are not going to be able to design solutions unless they consider the lived experiences and the values of all of these different people in these different community groups that call the Midwest home. And I see this so often, folks doing research, whether it's on electric vehicles, if you're not talking to the people who are going to be actually building these vehicles, driving these vehicles, living with them, driving down their streets, you've got to be talking to people with garages, people without garages, so we have to really all of those details. How do we go from a nugget of a great idea to actual implementation and actual solutions is going to take all of us at the table. And until we know each other's stories, we're not going to be able to have a fully effective solution. And then appreciating our natural resources and the tremendous assets that we have, as Dr. Criss was talking about with our rivers. That's one of the things that makes our region so unique. While they present unique challenges, there's also tremendous opportunity here with the amount of fresh water we have, the agricultural land we have, the infrastructure that's already been built up in this region. And so until we learn to really appreciate those things and appreciate one another, those are really going to be the basic building blocks of truly meaningful and significant lasting climate action.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. I mean, really, truly meaningful, sustained climate action. That's a wonderful vision for our region. Thank you. So, and lastly, certainly not least, Erica Williams. Welcome, Erica. Erica is the executive director of A Red Circle and is somebody who's very practiced at that whole idea of bringing people together, with the cookout idea, bringing people together around common interests and common efforts. So welcome, Erica.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here on this panel. As you said and alluded to, I love food and all things food related. And because we do grow food at a Red Circle, and we teach about things like composting and all of that. All of that is related to the environment, and we can't grow the food that we need to grow if the environment isn't right. You know, if the air isn't right, if the water isn't quality, if there are things in the ground that will make our soil dangerous. And so that's why all of this comes together, all of the environmental features, because at the end of the day, you know, after we do all our studying and all of that, if we can't get the people what they need, then we haven't done a really good job. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Erica. Well, next we have some specific questions for each of our panelists. And I do want to also encourage our audience members, you know, please, if you have a question, please put it in the chat and you can address it to one of our individual panelists, you know, or the group as a whole. So please go ahead and put those in the chat. So Leah, if we could start with you. Your work really involves organizing and empowering residents, well, in the region, but now we understand beyond, to stand up and address environmental issues in their communities. Could you give us a little bit of the specifics about the current issues that you're focusing on, that people are standing up for, and how is that working?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say, like, my work is really rooted in environmental justice and environmental racism education, right? So, you know, when we're talking about addressing the environment, we're talking to, like what Heather had lifted up, talking to all people, right? And also, like, what builds a community? So we're talking about the schools, we're talking about the health public officials, we're talking about the hospitals, we're talking about the science, the biodiversity, right? And then we're also talking about all the people, the original people, right? So the indigeneity, the first people, and then the people who have reside historically, right? And so when we bring all of those conversations together, folks are talking about the environment from all different aspects, right? Some people are talking about land ownership. What does that mean? And what does that mean to have it taken away? And who's benefiting that, to what Dr. Criss was talking about, like, follow the money. You literally should, right? This is definitely a people over profit type conversation, right? We're talking about healthcare, health resources. If you do not have access to healthy food, how then are you expected to have and be functional within your school system, right? So when we're talking about food apartheid, I do a lot of work with mutual aid and a Red Circle and so many other local farmers and rural farmers to make sure that their voices are being heard and getting out there, because Missouri, you know, we are a show me state. I love our state. But if you don't give people space and opportunity to see it for themselves, then, you know, we question and give all the side eye, right? So the opportunity to provide space for folks to not just hear about what's going on, listen to each other about how the stories and how they're being impacted, come up with solutions, and then we work together to identify who are our champions, who are our aldermen, who are our county councilmen, who are our state legislators, who's in Congress, who's saying what, and who supports us as people and our voices. We're not going to always be seeing things the same way, but can we come together in the middle? Right. And that's what's great about the Midwest and the people here, right? We find ways of coming to the middle, as long as you don't try hard to tell me how to think, right? People find ways to come to the middle. And so, you know, we talk about food, like I said, we talk about food apartheid, we talk about land access, who has it and who doesn't. We talk about illegal dumping. We talk about, of course, air quality, right? Our climate situation is a real thing. If you want a later conversation, you know, we are looking at what they predicted in 2060, we could potentially have they call it, I think they call it wet bulbs days, which means that it's going to get so hot that we can't even go outside to work, and to the point of which people can't breathe after 30 minutes. It's not okay, right? And we don't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Just like with Dr. Criss was talking about our rivers. Why? Anybody who grew up here in Missouri, you know the phrase "down by the river," right? And you visited the river, right? And it's like part of growing up. You go to Cardinal games, hockey game, and go down by the river, right? And so often our access to our rivers is being withdrawn or limited because of the constant allowance of pollution and water variant increases happening to our water that is making it difficult for our native wildlife like the pallet sturgis to actually sustain, and making it comfortable for even us to even be in that water. So where now you might run into a Japanese carp come up and slap you in the face. I had that happen. It was very, I was like, oh gosh, is this real? No, okay, brace myself. But these are things that should not be happening. And these are also, this is our land, right? We pay taxes, we fight for it, we have a historical connection. So how do we allow ourselves to respect the land, the water, the air we breathe, the people who live here, make sure that people have healthy food, healthy work and living environments so they can thrive and be a part of this beautiful environment that involves both land, air, water, as well as people and animals.
I love the way you linked everything together. So I have a follow-up question for you, just in terms of getting people motivated, working with communities and getting them motivated. Do you have maybe a specific example that, because I feel like sometimes we can be so focused on how frightening the environmental situation is, how bad it is, but do you have a specific examples of a community who's really come together and, really managed some environmental successes?
So our successes need to be measured not by tangibles, but by capacity increase. We have a long road ahead of us, right? We live in a state where we have the #1 super polluter in our region. And so what super polluters, how they are identified, basically are an industry that has high impact and influence in said area, right? So it makes it very difficult to transition from old ways of doing things to the new way of doing things. Not saying that it's impossible. And we can say that because we have won that, right? And there has been much of that. Slowly but surely, we have chipped away at said giant, right? We've also been able to, all across Missouri specific, build some amazing, incredible teams of just invested communities where you might be over in, let's see, Dutchtown, right? Where we have been able to work together with community members, local resources like the specifically Dutchtown South, their resource center, if you will, for residents, and also local businesses, along with their aldermen and the city officials to make sure that we really go at the conversation around illegal dumping that's happening in their community. And it's not where we'd like it to be, but it's on its way. And the fact that people are motivated and rising up to say no more and are keeping an eye out. See, that's what matters. I try to remind people that how our system works is that, yeah, we vote people in, but then those people need to hear from us. They can't do nothing if they don't hear from us, essentially. They need our support to fight the good fight on the floor. Then when they fight the good fight on the floor, and if they catch any pushback, then it's up to us as the people to identify where that pushback is coming from and make sure, amplify ourselves even louder. And that's how we keep moving the dial forward. So Dutchtown South was one, North City, North St. Louis, that we're really building momentum there. You know, COVID put a big glitch in the system, right? But what some amazing things happened was folks got real creative. Folks got creative in asking for help. Folks got creative in identifying help and just wanting to reach out. So being in partnership with folks like a Red Circle, Homes for All, and so many other nonprofits across St. Louis, and as well as churches have combined our efforts together to talk about how do we get food and other resources to folks who don't have access to bus. Healthy homes or any kind of like online access, but how do we get them access to healthy foods? Then from there, getting them informed about what's going on in their community, and then mobilizing them in a way that they are informed to make good decisions, whether it is understanding about how their bills are being could potentially be increased, to what resources are out there to help them handle their bills and or advocate for healthier housing conditions. And you know, that wasn't happening in that way before, but we're huge now. I would later definitely tap in Erica and be like, right, we're big and mighty, right? And that's all through efforts of just people all getting on a call together and being like, what can we do? So, and then also I'll be amiss to leave out rural Missouri, right? That area, you know, what people tend to forget is that rural Missouri and urban Missouri is the same kind of people. People have a history to the land and the community in which they love and live, and they love it, right? Like, and so especially we do a lot of work with folks over in Labadee, the Leo Labadee Environmental Organization, Leo for short, and their passion for their land, talking about the issues around groundwater and the pollution that keeps on finding its way into their wells, and their concern on the impacts on the land that they live. You know, their passion is really what helps us bring the two conversations together. And so, you know, they're winning as well. They've been going long and strong. They were small, and now they themselves are also multiplying. And we're starting to connect the dots, bring people from both sides of the state together. And that's a huge win in my book. That is a long time coming, and to see this happening in this way, along with partnerships with MRCC, you know, it's, you know, so often in Jefferson City, our legislators talk about, oh, we represent the salt of the earth people. But when the salts of the earth are also saying that they feel like they're being ignored, then we get folks from the city saying that they feel ignored. Now you got a whole lot of Missourians concerned. And so I believe that we are on the right path. We still have a lot of work to do, but it's, like I said, it's chipping at the giant, one conversation, one action at a time.
Oh my gosh, I love the story. I mean, this is all fantastic, you know, Dutchtown, North City, but using the partnerships that came together around because of COVID, just to provide food and internet access, and then strengthening and continuing to build those partnerships to be able to address these larger systemic issues. Oh, how fantastic. And bridging that urban rural divide. Woohoo, way to go. That's extraordinary. Erica, we'd love to hear from you next. I do have a question. You know, and please, you know, follow up on any of Leah's remarks, specifically how a Red Circle and Leah and others, you guys have all worked together on some really exciting projects. Sounds great. So Leah, a Red Circle works across many communities in North St. Louis County. And we know environmental issues don't affect all communities equally. Can you talk a little bit about how environmental issues have affected those communities in particular, those that you serve?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, we grow food, and we also try to work with other organizations that are growing food. And believe it or not, there are still issues with something known as the cold water creek that is impacting our ability to work with our partners to grow food, to increase healthy food access in the region. You know, part of the environment is not only the natural environment, but also the built environment. And in North St. Louis County, we have a lot more unhealthy food choices and food options than we do healthy food options. And so we're working to try to figure out, you know, how can we increase the healthy food access through whether it's a store, urban farms, gardens, things of that nature. But then how do we meet the needs of the community to essentially want the healthy foods more than the unhealthy foods? You know, when you've grown up around something for so long, you've built an taste palette for it. You're used to it, you know, how to cook the foods that in cans and that's maybe frozen and things of that nature. So as we're working to increase fresh produce and introducing things, we had a meeting this morning. You know, we're going through our 5-year strategic plan at A Red Circle, and we talked about the benefits of herbs and how important they are for people's health. But we grow herbs, and you know, they don't come out the ground with labels. You know, you can't say oregano and this, that, and the other. So sometimes people get the herbs and they're not really sure exactly not only what to do with them, but what they are, because they're not labeled as they would be in the store. And, you know, within our stores, you know, when there are things that are, you know, at the stores, there's a lot of like processed foods, highly salted foods. And so there's all these different, not necessarily behavioral changes, but like behavioral education around healthy food. So can we grow the food that we need to grow, first of all, on land that has been contaminated? We have an urban farm in Pine Lawn, and the space where the urban farm is, there were houses that were buried underground. And so we're working to, we did the soil testing to make sure there weren't any contaminants, but now we're working to actually build up the soil with new soil so that the stuff that we use to grow food is actually beneficial. Because if you're not having the right nutrients, the right pH balance in your soil, you're not going to grow very good food. So these are the things that we are having to pay for, but that we did not cause. And that's part of the injustice. That's part of, you know, we're working to mitigate the disinvestment. Not only was the healthy food taken away from our communities when people moved away because of white flight, but we're having to then pay for those things and raise the money and beg for people to help us get the things back that we should already have. Healthy food is a public health issue. And it should not be just, you know, for people who have good stores in their neighborhoods or who can afford CSAs and things of that nature. So that's part of the whole environmental issue around, you know, trying to get what we need to get for our neighbors. It's about talking to people, getting people to trust what we're doing, because when people have been harmed, there's a lot of distrust. When you're trying to do something new, something good, something radical, it sounds good and fun to you, but to them, it's like, what are you talking about? Why are you shaming me for my choices when this is all that I have had for my whole life? So that's all of the work that we're doing. It's all intersected. It's not just about growing food. You know, people like to grow gardens and take pictures of the kids because it's cute and all that, which is great. But we have to still talk about, why is this area a food desert? Why is it a food swamp? What happened to the healthy food? And why is this people been deemed not worthy of the healthy food?
Oh, wow. Very powerful. You know, why are these people not deemed worthy for healthy food? And, you know, I don't know if our viewers know this, but I know with the changes in grocery stores in the area that, you know, when Shop and Save went out, it really created a huge, I mean, just a vacuum of opportunity. I mean, it just like sucked so much out. But Erica, could you speak a little bit to the new venture that A Red Circle is tackling in North County that it seems very exciting?
Yes. So we are working on opening a community-owned grocery store that will help to mitigate at least some of the Shop and Save closures. So back to Louise's point, when Shop and Save closed, they left us with 4 vacant buildings. Now, one of the vacant buildings is across cat-a-corner from a Schnucks. So that one didn't necessarily need to be refigured as a Schnucks, but there were 3 stores, and these are huge stores. So not only are they empty stores with no food, no jobs, no sales tax revenue, but they also create spaces for things to happen like illegal dumping, back alley deals and things of that nature. And so we are raising money currently to open a community-owned grocery store that will not only house fresh produce, good quality meats, whole grains, things like brown rice, 100% whole wheat bread, and some other limited items. But we're also going to provide space for farmers, local farmers and growers to have a cold storage on the parking lots. That way they can have somewhere to store their produce, because that's one of the really big things about when you're urban farming. Yes, you can grow the food, but then what do I do with it when it's time to harvest it? Where do I store it? So we're going to provide that space for urban farmers to use. And then we're also going to have a demonstration garden on the property so we can show residents how they can grow some small things at home, tomatoes, herbs, things of that nature, just so to take away some of the fear, some of the intimidation around cooking with fresh produce. And then lastly, we're going to have inside the store a demonstration kitchen. We're calling it Healthy Flavor Bistro, because you can't just bring healthy food. You have to keep in mind the enjoyment that people get out of food. So we're going to call it the Healthy Flavor Bistro, which is a play on our Healthy Flavor community garden that we currently have now. And depending on the size of the building that we land on, it's either going to be a small bistro with like countertop space, or there's actually going to be like a small kind of restaurant space, because back to the built environment issue, the areas that we're working in don't have spaces where people to meet, to gather, to strategize, to advocate. We don't have community centers and spaces like that. And so one of our staff members was mentioning the presence of the dispensaries and things that are popping up in North County. We're getting these before we get food. And she's noticing that other areas are able to come together and advocate and go to their city council meetings, because they have space, they have the bandwidth, they have the resources to strategize, whereas we're kind of left on our own devices waiting for things to happen because we don't have the spaces that we need to strategize. So this store is going to be a space that will provide all of that. The store is going to be a social enterprise model, so it will be owned by a for-profit entity and an LLC. So that way we can charge sales taxes, because when you're talking about areas that are food deserts, that are food swamps, they're also investment deserts and jobs deserts and entertainment deserts. And so we'll be able to charge sales taxes on the merchandise to feed into the local school district that has lost a lot of sales taxes, and to feed into the region. So that'll help bring in some of the money that's been lost because of white flight and disinvestment, things of that nature. And so a red circle will be there to offer the programming, the cooking demos, the demonstration, but the store will be owned by the LLC. So we are currently raising money to get the store opened. Well, we have a capital campaign that's on our website currently. If you guys want to go there to donate, we have raised about $25,000 of that so far. But that's the work that we're doing, because it's not about just this far away environmental issues, but it's about what's happening in where we live, where we sleep, where we lay our heads. We shouldn't have to go out of our region to shop and buy food and spend money and benefit those regions with our sales tax dollars, and not have what we need where we sleep, where we lay our heads at night.
Oh my gosh, this is just so fantastic. Do you, and you don't have a location yet, you're still.
Yeah, so we had a location, but back to this whole land use justice, someone else who could put a contract on the space before we could. And so that's why we're really trying to get into a good financial space, so that when we find the location, we can be like, here you go. But we are working with St. Louis County Development and St. Louis County Council. St. Louis County has a lot of, properties and things in areas like Castle Point and other areas that they're not using. So we're like, hey, deed us over some space so we can make some good use out of it. So we're trying to be creative. But there's still that inequity in leadership and money and resources. And so if folks on this call, you guys, any kind of way that you guys can help, we would more than appreciate it.
And I'll just point everybody to the chat. Wally has put in, Kate has put in the Red Circle's website, and Wally has put in the donation site for the particular initiative you're speaking to, Erica. This is just really exciting. So you know, those of you who want to do something and get involved, oh my gosh, now we have the volunteer. So hopefully we'll get you some good help, get you a great location. And this just seems such an exciting endeavor. So cool, so great. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Erica. Well, next, I'd like to kind of let's expand out a little bit and hear from Heather. Heather, you know, we know that climate change conversations often focus on the coast, you know, talking about flooding, talking about sea level rise. Oh my gosh, Miami, Manhattan, you know, big parts of Virginia, parts of California. But can you give us a little bit of a better understanding of what does climate change mean here in the Midwest? And exactly how, from a regional perspective, how are we working to address these significant issues?
Yes, thanks, Louise. And as you said earlier, hotter and wetter. I mean, that's what climate change is looking like for us here in the Midwest. And that's one of the things that excites me about this new collaborative is that we are using a Midwestern lens on climate change, if you will. And because, as you said, we've seen so much investment on the coast. And, you know, we've got a lot of coastline too. It's just in the shape of rivers and lakes. And so, you know, that means we've got different opportunities and different challenges than they have on the coast. And I think one of the important things to remember, or just even know, is that if our 12-state region of the Midwest were a country, we would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And so what we do here has implications, not just for those of us who live here in the Midwest, but it has global implications. So it really is important that we get organized, that we start to take actions to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, because we are a major player on a global scale. And a lot of that comes from agriculture, transportation, building, you know, our old building stock, all of those things. So we do have unique challenges and opportunities here in the Midwest. We have a lot of old industrial cities, rural farms and communities. We experience all 4 seasons. And this really came to light for me when I was an alderperson in the city, working on solar readiness legislation or electric vehicle charging, infrastructure. And so much of the research or the model ordinances would come from Atlanta or Austin or San Diego. And honestly, you know, that's not really relevant. They have a lot more sun than we do, for one. We do have 4 seasons. Those areas are also growing in terms of population, and a lot of the cities in the Midwest aren't seeing that type of growth right now. I think we will, and that's why we've got to be prepared and start thinking ahead. I also think about the opportunities for resilience here in the Midwest are just different. You know, going back to our rivers and our floodplains, you know, we know we're going to have more precipitation. We know, you know, and Dr. Criss can speak to this more eloquently than I can. Just all of the things that we've done to constrict our rivers over the years, to make floods more devastating, make the water run faster. All of that is going to be exacerbated when we have more precipitation and with more development in the floodplains. And so we need a paradigm shift when it comes to what does development look like so that we can live with healthy river systems. Just access to fresh water. You know, we have these forests, we start looking at those as carbon sinks. We also have a legacy of manufacturing. We're a manufacturing hub, transportation, logistics. These are all going to be important pieces in a green economy in the future. And so we can be ready for the future in ways that other parts of the country can't be. And so while we've seen a lot of investments on the coast, and a lot of that is, I mean, honestly, a lot of those cities and states are more organized than we are. They're thinking ahead because climate change is right there nipping at their heels, eating up their coastline. And we can start to learn about that, you know, I would say proactive, but I mean, it's too late to be proactive at this point. But, you know, one of my hopes with this Midwest Climate Collaborative is that, you know, whether it's the White House, it's the United Nations, or it's a major foundation, I want them to be thinking about the Midwest as a place where climate action is happening. We are making significant changes and we are ready. And so that means thinking about, like, going back to hotter and wetter, the urban heat island effect. You know, what is happening in our cities? What do we need to do to expand tree canopy, to reduce impervious surfaces? And these are things that it's not just St. Louis, in Detroit, Indianapolis, Cleveland, Minneapolis. So instead of looking at what's already being done in, the southern states or the coastal states, we need to start talking to one another and sharing best practices, learning from one another, replicating what's working. And we also have some unique challenges just in terms of, implementing solutions. The political dynamics in the Midwest are different than they are on the coast. And so all of that has to come into play. The legacy here, how systemic racism has played out in the Midwest is different than it is in southern cities, for example. And also, the indigenous nations that we have here and the tribal communities that we have here, and how we've treated natural resources, how to access has been restricted and distributed, are all things that are unique to us here in the Midwest. And it's something that they're not going to figure out for us on the coast. We've got to start doing that work ourselves. And so I am excited that with this new collaborative, we're going to be able to really focus on the natural resources that we have here that are unique to us, that are going to be the solutions for climate change. And they're also going to be the tools for resiliency.
Well, thank you. Yeah, really, it all comes down to how we treat and share our natural resources, isn't it? And then share with each other equitably, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Do you have, you definitely are now having this like larger scale perspective, but knowing you've always had that. And from your position as an alderperson, and before that, executive director of Missouri Coalition for the Environment, do you have any particular success stories or sort of, opportunities that are moving us along in a way that we can all champion and support, and, something specific to hang our hats on?
I think there are a lot of really wonderful things happening. And I think that's part of the storytelling that we need to do better as well. So one of the things that I mentioned is we've got a lot of old building stock in a lot of these old industrial cities, and cities in the Midwest are now starting to lead the way when we look at how do we make these buildings more energy efficient for the future. So St. Louis, Kansas City, and several other cities across the Midwest are implementing building energy performance standards. So the success is that we've gotten these things passed. Many cities have already been benchmarking for several years, and I think just that in itself is a success. And I think it was Erica who mentioned earlier, like building capacity in terms of how we measure success. And I think that's part of it, is understanding, again, what are the resources and the assets? How do we focus our efforts? And we know, like in St. Louis and a lot of these cities, our building stock is a source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so the fact that we're seeing a lot of cities start to take this seriously, I think is big, is a success. Along with another one I'll mention with our river systems. Flooding is a major issue, and it has been for a long time, and it's only going to be exacerbated. And we know a lot of that has to do with constricting our rivers. We have floodplain rivers. They want to meander miles, over the land. And we need to start thinking about rivers not as just some channel or a ditch, but the land that they occupy, the habitat of the river, if you will. And there are efforts to start moving levees back, giving room to the river. And I think that is going to be a major component of our success. Here at the confluence of the two greatest rivers in the country, we are unique in all of the world in terms of what we have here. And if we want, and this is a place where people are going to want to be, in 50 years, when people can't live on the coast anymore, when they need access to agricultural land, this is going to be the place to be. And so we have got to figure this out. We've got to make room for our rivers so that we can all, live sustainably with these resources. And so those projects where they are moving levees back, they've done this in Columbia, they've done this in other places in the Midwest. Also thinking about what crops can we be growing in the floodplain so that we can let the water inundate the land and still be able to farm. So those sorts of things are happening. And that's, again, why we need to start learning from one another, replicating best practices, amplifying what's worked. So those are a few. I think there's also a lot happening with electric vehicle infrastructure, and that has to happen in a way that we're not exacerbating the disparities between the haves and the have-nots. This technology needs to be available. So, you know, what we did here in St. Louis in terms of putting it into the building code, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what neighborhood you live in, this house is going to have a place for you to plug in a car. Now, there's still a lot to figure out. You know, right now, if you don't have a garage and you park on a public street, you've got to be able to afford that car as well. So there's a lot we've got to work out. But I think we are putting those building blocks in place, and I'm really excited to see this work amplified and accelerated across the Midwest.
And I will just echo, I see all these pieces coming together too. They're not quite as strongly linked as I think we'd like and what we need, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And hopefully we're getting there quicker, sooner rather than later. Thank you, Heather. Dr. Criss, you know, as Heather and you've mentioned about managing our rivers, you know, being friends with the rivers, this is a huge piece of you know, our choices for our environment. And there's certainly been a lot of different discussion about building on floodplain, what should be on floodplains, what shouldn't be on floodplains. And your work in modeling these natural systems, it really has a huge understanding of how we understand and live alongside our rivers in our region. Can you give us a little indication of what we should be paying attention to as we make these choices, developing and growing our communities in the future?
Well, sure. There's a whole variety of topics associated with the rivers that we should talk about. I guess I want to start with dealing with some very damaging misconceptions we have inherited about rivers. One is that floods are a problem. We need to fight the river. We need to control the river. The river is best used as a artery for transport. That's the finest use of the river. We shouldn't be fighting the rivers. The natural cycles of the world are our friends. Rivers are our friends. They bring us water, not only a water supply flowing in the obvious channel, but there's valuable groundwater supplies in the alluvial gravels to either side of the river that are used by many Missouri cities around here. St. Charles has well fields. Kansas City has well fields. Columbia, Missouri has well fields along the side of the river. We used to have well fields in Kirkwood. They've been removed, but they were here just 10 years ago or so. So there's many valuable aspects of the rivers, and when they flood, they bring, just as they did for the Egyptians, they fertilize the land and so forth. What is our narrative instead? We got to control the river. We got to fight the river. You might as well want to fight the moon. Floods even are our friends. If you look at the flooded forest, watch a nature show about the Amazon, the flood times, the flooded forest is when fishing's good. It's not a bunch of raging water. We have the narrative that flood waters rage. No, floods are gentle if you're anywhere away from the main channel. There's this iconic video, I'm sure you've all seen, of this beautiful farmhouse swirling helplessly around in the maelstrom of the 1993 flood. And the Army Corps loves to tell us, you know, we're fighting this raging river. Well, that isn't natural flooding. That was a levee break. It's a failure of one of our structures. You get high water on one side and no water on the other side, and the levee breaks. Then you get a torrent of water that rips across the land, knocks houses off their foundations, rips the asphalts off the roads, strips all the topsoil off the land. We've done this. This is not river control. Even Mark Twain told us that only a fool would try to control a river. There is no way to control the Mississippi, he tried to tell us. One of my friends told me, so far as river dredging goes, that only a fool would try to dig a hole in the bottom of a river. And yet these are the things we try to do. The wing dikes along the side of the Mississippi and all the way up the Missouri, all the way to Sioux City, the length of those structures exceeds the length of the riverbanks themselves. We've thrown more rocks into the river. The river is now half as wide as it was historically. Not only have we channelized the river, but we've walled it off with levees that are too high on either side. And then we wonder why it floods. We've made it flood. And worse yet, we continue. There are projects underway in St. Louis County. They've been underway since I've lived here for nearly 30 years, but they continue to this day of trying to build up levees higher and higher to improve that infrastructure along the river so we can have more floodplain development in the floodplains, which those lands are best used for water resources and for agriculture. And as Heather alluded to, the gold in our future in St. Louis isn't another big box store in a floodplain that's just adding risk to us and encumbering us with debt. The gold in our future in a growing world with higher population and more demand for natural resources, the gold we have is our fresh water, the groundwater to either side of our rivers, and the best cropland in the world. That's where our future is. It's not in big box stores and floodplain development. That is wasting what we have. The rivers are valuable wildlife corridors, they're valuable recreational corridors. They're great for doing certain kind of things, and they're very poorly suited for the tasks that we seem to want to assign to them. Now, we ought to look at the admonishments I gave earlier about following the money. Even now, we have all this infrastructure windfall. So there's all kinds of extra money, we think. Of course, it comes from somewhere. So we're going to expand and rebuild the lock and dam at Winfield for only the better part of $1 billion for that single project. There's actually $17 billion in this infrastructure money that's going to go to the Army Corps, and a lot of it's to improve our inland waterway system. Well, who is benefiting from that? You know the toll that one of these huge barges pays to go through a lock? Zero. They don't build the locks. They don't dredge the channel. These agricultural and barge transport companies don't pay for a darn thing. And this is always billed as if it's in the public good. Now, I'm not saying those guys can't do that if they want, they get permission. I think it's a lousy idea, but if their transportation system is so good, why can't they pay for it themselves? A railroad has to build their own track. They've got to own their own land. They have to maintain their own track. They have to pay taxes on the land they own. So why is the government subsidizing this favored industry only centuries after they've already subsidized them? Why do we keep subsidizing the past? Do we think the only way to get around is on a steamboat still? What's the matter with St. Louis? It's time to look forward. And if you're investing in things, if we give a college scholarship, you want to give it to an old codger like me or to a kid that's got a future? You got to subsidize things that have potential for growth. You don't subsidize things that are old way of doing things. So follow the money. These guys clamor that the inland waterway system is such an asset to Americans. Well, the interstate highway system was an asset. Everybody uses the freeways. How many locks and dams have you used lately? How much river dredging have you used lately? We don't use that stuff. Projects in the past, rural electrification, Tennessee Valley Authority projects to bring electricity to people. Those things benefited millions of Americans directly. We did things that benefited people. The national parks benefited people. The natural forests benefited people, people at large. Who's the inland waterway system benefit? Why do we continue to do this stuff and pass it off as a public good? Why do we continue in St. Louis to pass off floodplain development projects as if it's the public good? It's not the public good, it's the good of some landowner, and it's to the public detriment. It's to the detriment of wildlife. It's to the detriment of our water supplies. It isn't, it's the detriment to our control of the rivers and our vulnerabilities to flooding. It makes all these things worse. We subsidize the past and we don't look forward. These are bad ideas that our region needs to wean themselves from. And until we do, we will not be the world leader we ought to be. We are situated in one of the most marvelous, most beautifully naturally endowed regions of Earth. And yet we're a ho-hum city. St. Louis is just not one of the great places to be. And it ought to be. It's a wonderful area. We have beautiful parks and things. And what is glorious about our region is when we have gotten the equation right, not when we've looked backwards and gotten it wrong. Anyway, that's a lot.
Dr. Criss, I think let's see, you've got realm request for you to run for office already in the chat.
No.
I mean, people are just, you were calling it like it is. Thank you. I mean, subsidizing the past, you know, that is exactly what it is. And it seems like, you know, I'll kind of pull us into some very current with the situation where Russia's invaded Ukraine. You know, here we're as a nation moving forward slowly but surely on some really important policy changes when it came to climate change. And all of a sudden, you know, more opportunity for the fossil fuel industry because of, you know, not using the small amount of Russian fossil fuels that we use. So we just, it's really, what is it? It's so hard for us to move forward. Look at the future. Thank you. Really good. Really good. You just pulled it together beautifully. I do have a question for everybody, really. And I'd love to know, we have a really great question here. What kinds of policy questions should we be looking at to address how all these old models and ideas of development prioritize infrastructure over humans, over the reality of our lived experiences and the lived experiences of our friends and neighbors?
So,
okay, everybody's going to take that.
So I'll be real quick, and then I'm gonna let Leah
go, Erica.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna say one of the policy changes we can start to look at is how we look at the budget. You know, we have lawmakers that are looking at the budget on all levels, local, state, and federal. And part of the work that they're looking at in terms of the budget is what is the return on investment? I think if people begin to look at what the return on investment and investing in people and not just in buildings, then they will be more able to come up with a more holistic budget. You know, what is it going to take to invest dollars in public health to get healthy food and not just to invest? Like I saw the thing about the tax credit with the urban farms and all that kind of stuff, which is great, but what is that going to do for the people, for the region that may not necessarily need the tax credit? They need the taxes to pay for stuff. So what are we going to look at to actually invest in the people and the people's health? How are we going to frame the budget for those types of things? Those are the policy things I think that people should start with.
Yeah, so what I was going to do is like refer everyone, if you haven't seen it already, the Environmental Racism Report highlights a lot of this stuff. Because if you don't know what was, then you can't be clear about what could be or what is, right? I was one of the co-authors amongst Action St. Louis, Art City Defender, sorry about that, and WashU Environmental Law Clinic. And one of the things that we found in our research is this team for idea. It was not a law, but it was a philosophy or an idea that had been the grounding for so many policies and understandings throughout St. Louis, which basically talks about siphoning resources in order to serve and resource the central corridor. So look at what was, and then going further, when it's also good to go talk to your alderman, especially if you're talking about St. Louis, right? We have aldermen. St. Louis County has county council members. You got to know the difference. But when you do, find out who those people are and ask them just about like what's going on. To Erica's point, where's the nearest grocery store? And why do I have to drive 45 minutes to get one? And why is it at my grocery store, this food is expiration date is about to be next week? Right? That's a real thing, and that's a problem. You don't have to go far. The question really is also, I know I've worked with Heather when she was an alderwoman and her team over at Missouri MCE, where we were looking at the whys behind resources that's going to farmers in one area, but not to farmers in the other, right? And we have to just keep asking these questions along with passing the buck. Greenwashing is a thing, and don't drink the juice, right? Don't get caught up in the ideas of, oh, that sounds right. Look at what this stuff actually means. It's happening all over, and trust me when I tell you, it's not as good as it sounds. And so, like again, I said before, ask why, ask what is this, and ask for more details. Half the time, which many aldermen have pointed out to me, half the time things are brought to their desk, but there's piles of things brought to their desk. So they need for us who are concerned citizens that voted them in to say, hey, this is what I heard about, this is what this means. What do you know, and how, and this is how I feel about this, and what can you do about it? And that will support them to not just be clear about what the issue is, but also really dive deeper into the work. And trust me when I tell you, St. Louis City especially has some really committed people that all you have to do is reach out and say something. And I do believe that same thing for the county, but as a city resident myself, I just know I know I tap on the door, if not knock on the door, or make all the calls, one of the two. So.
Oh, thank you, Erica. Thank you so much, Leah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing for us to remember, that really we voted him in. Yeah, let's help him out as much as possible. So Heather or Dr. Criss, that question again, sort of via Gene Ponzi, what kinds of policy questions should we be looking at to address these old models, these old ideas of development? How do we make that shift so we're prioritizing infrastructure over humans?
I think the major shift that we need a major shift right now, and we've got millions, billions of dollars that are going to be spent on infrastructure in the very near future here. And if we don't pivot immediately, we are just going to be setting our, as Dr. Criss said, we're subsidizing the past. There's so much we know now about the carbon footprint of, just take concrete, for example. We are getting ready to replace roads, and we're going to need to be replacing roads for a long time. And one of the effects of heat in especially in cities, we're going to have more buckling roads. We're going to have more water pipes bursting, all of these things. So there's going to be a lot of infrastructure that needs to be updated and maintained, especially with the impacts of climate change. And if we just keep slapping down pavement and building bridges like we did 50 years ago, we are just setting ourselves back. So we have a tremendous opportunity with all of this money that is coming in. We need to start looking at green infrastructure. How do we leverage the resources that we have here? How do we do things differently? How do we reduce the carbon footprint of everything from concrete to the buildings that we're building, when we're doing new parking lots? How do we do things differently? And that is one of my biggest concerns right now, is that we are getting prepared. We are preparing ourselves to spend a whole bunch of money, and the time is now for a paradigm shift to start doing these things new. We have the research out there. We know what works. We know what we need to do. And as so many people have said on this call, it's the political will. It's getting in front of our decision makers and saying, we need to do things differently. We are at a crisis point. And so there is this tension between, we need to do something, get out there and do it now. How much time do you spend researching and talking? And again, I think one of the great benefits of the Midwest Climate Collaborative is that you are bringing researchers to the table with the practitioners, because you can come up with all sorts of great solutions. Talk about snow removal, but if you're not talking to the person driving the snow plow, and the person maintaining that truck, whatever wonderful solution you just came up with doesn't matter. And same thing, just we need to plant more trees. But until we learn how to fix the sidewalks and the streets and the aging pipes that the roots infiltrate, these solutions don't matter. So getting everybody to the table and figuring out how we spend this money is extremely important right now.
Heather, do you have any words of wisdom or advice on kind of like where that critical place for people to be who want to create this, as Wally said, the shift in thinking, where like each of us who's on this call, what should we do? Is it, talk to our council members, talk to our alder people? Do we go to the state level? Where are things happening now where we can exert some influence?
Well, I would say all of it. We need to do all of it. But we know pressure works. And I think right now, especially when we talk about infrastructure and development, there's a whole development community in St. Louis that, is operating off of best practices. And then, you've got the city's way of doing things. And, there's not always a lot of talk there. So we need, I think, we need to go after the folks who are building the buildings. When somebody does a new project it's often the private developer who's going back in and putting in replacing the sidewalks. So they're the ones hiring a contractor to replace the old sewer pipes or, whatever it might be. And so I think there's got to be outreach also to the private development community, because they can start to drive things. I mean, after being in City Hall so long, I was only there 4.5 years. It's not even that long, but it doesn't take that long to understand that, yeah, things have been done a certain way for a long time, and it takes a lot of work to change that. And part of it is resources are limited. People are very risk averse when you're using taxpayer money. And so we just tend to do the same things we've always done because that's what we know. And so the more we can tap into some of those private resources and get private pressure. One of the things that I heard from private developers when I was in office was, you need to be asking us to do more. The architecture community knows how to design better buildings. Contractors know, even if they don't know how, they know there are better ways to do things. But until somebody's actually making them do it, people are gonna, again, follow the money. So I think definitely political leaders need to know that this is what their constituents want. However, the solutions often are not going to come from the folks at City Hall, because they are just doing everything they can to keep the lights on and keep the basic city services going. And so the innovation, the ability to try something new, I think is going to come from other members in the community. And that's why we've got to get people together. It's got to be a cross-sectoral solution and effort that we work towards. So, and I think a lot of us often, when I was in more of an advocacy role, we can kind of put people in boxes and these people are on the good side, these people are on the bad side, whether it's utilities or whoever it is, we're all part of the solution, and we've got to get everybody there. We have to understand the role that everybody plays, from the person delivering the electricity, the person plowing the streets, the person building the building. We've got to understand the ins and outs of what their job looks like in order to come up with a realistic solution that's going to work.
Louise, just real quick.
ahead.
So one of the other, like, what was it, 2 years ago, I think, was Resolution 124. It's still a resolution. Resolutions really don't mean anything until they're law, right? So, I mean, if you really want to lean in on something, that according to Resolution 124, that was really basically um, an understanding that the city will invest in renewable processes and resources for all city-owned properties, as well as working with development agencies that are coming into our city. So, but until that turns into an actual thing, then it's just a great idea that is sitting in the wings of our city hall. And so, like, if you really want to lean in on something that is currently just sitting in the ether, that's one. But I mean, there's these initiatives that are talking about green schools, where they're looking at different schools having outdoor classrooms and making sure that there's green space for that. But again, when we have these green spaces, who are we leaving out of the conversation? Where are these at? Are they on the south side of the Del Mar Divide, or are they on the north side of the Del Mar Divide? Or is it equal, right, on both sides? Because if we don't have equality, then we don't have nothing. We're just perpetuating the same nonsense over and over again, but with a different face.
Thank you, Leah. Boy, I think we have an activist organization getting started here to get collective voices, at least in the chat. This is fantastic. We have a couple of really good questions. One is, what's a good way to educate the average person, the average citizen who doesn't have time to learn about these issues, but just knows that something isn't working right? Who would like to take that question?
I can start. One of the things that we do, a lot of the education that kind of takes place at a Red Circle happens organically. And I use it as a pun because we're actually in the garden while we're talking about these things. So, we have people in the neighborhood who help us out. And we recently formed our Food and Justice Fellowship that invites young adults aged 19 to 26 to learn about these issues. They learn about food equity and justice. They learn about growing food and STEM, the science and all that behind growing food. And then they learn about business and entrepreneurship. And we were just on a panel the other day. Leah was one of our speakers. And so I think if, instead of it making it, sometimes things get so big, people get overwhelmed because we all want to learn about all of these things. Well, there can be groups that can teach a few people about maybe one or two of these things. And then once, you're making those things happen in your neighborhood, like we have a lot of issues in North County. One of them is Coldwater Creek, illegal dumping, all of these types of things. But what is it that we can tackle now and learn about now? The other thing is to use your touch points, use your trust factors when you're talking with people, when you're in conversation with people, whether it's at the grocery store or, at church, or just the various places where you're meeting with people. Take some time to just kind of have these conversations. It doesn't have to be like a big seminar or webinar every single time, but you can actually just kind of bring people's attention and awareness to the issues, and then allow them to learn on their own, to like kind of dig into them on their own. But at least if you're planting the seed, again, garden pun, planting the seed to, get people thinking about these issues, then when they're in school, when they're in conversation, when they're at different places, they can talk to people, and then the conversation can expand. It's no different than some of the noise that's been made around CRT. Well, no one had heard of CRT before, unless you were in college and that was something that you were studying while you were writing your dissertation or something like that. But now it's like mainstream conversations. The kind of same way we have to do that, not necessarily being loud and obnoxious, but just keeping it in the forefront of people's minds, the environment, and not making it such a, hug a tree kind of Greenpeace type thing, but really bring it home. What does this mean to me as a person?
Just real quick to chime in. So like one of the things I do actually on the side, because there's so many organizations, so many people, community groups who are just interested in doing exactly this, right? But don't really have the tools. And so like I provide these actual trainings for folks as well. But like all that it really is like, how many people are used to just coming over to someone's house and having dinner or lunch? Or, like Erica said, going to the, if you're a member at a church, what is your issue? What is the thing that is keeping you up late at night? That is the thing that you should bring to the table when you come to a community and say, hey, I'm noticing that my water smells funny, right? Or that when I went to the Katy Trail, it smelled horrible. I couldn't even ride my bike down there. Did that bother anybody else? Then all you need, whether it's 2 or 5 or 20 people, you've just started something. And then getting clear about, okay, so who should we be talking to? How can we make this, what is it that we need? And what are we demanding in this moment? And go for it. So often we think we have to know everything. All you need to know is you don't like it and you want something different. That's all that matters. Everything else will come together because that's why you have aldermen. That's why you have scientists. That's why you have lawyers. You don't have to be any of those things. You just have to be clear that you don't want this no more. And as a taxpayer, as a resident, as a person who lives here, that you deserve to have a healthy place to live where that you can thrive and explore the environment in which you live in. And in that space, that's how you can mobilize people. Also, what's really helpful is, don't browbeat people. Everybody comes to this conversation differently. So as organizers, we provide people all different kinds of ways of getting information, right? So this is tech age, so online, you can get it digitally, you can get it in a flyer, you can get it as a mailer, you can get it in a movie, you can go all the different ways, but then come up with your own understanding of what this is. Like I like to say, get it in your gut, and then let's go talk to people about it. And it'll be interesting. It's always interesting to see others be like, I didn't think about it like that, or I thought something was going on. I just thought it was me. I thought I was just being paranoid. You're like, nope. You're right. Something ain't right. Let's go do something. And that's when you actually that's when you build community, like the old school kind where people like talk to you when you walk outside and say good morning, So yeah.
Way to go, Leah. I think, somebody put in the chat about St. Louis being a place where people do say hi. Maybe it was you, I think. And people do say hi and wave. And it's like building that community around your passion, around what really matters. And we each really matter. That's really, really critical. We've got a question from Grace Wright with Great Rivers Greenway. Who can we reach out to make sure we are doing it right? And I'm assuming, Grace, you mean Great Rivers Greenway. We have $15 million in raised funds. We are tasked with spending in the city. I honestly don't know what raised funds are. So does someone know what they are? One of our panelists? Leah, looks like you're nodding your head.
So, I mean, I think there needs to be some clarification, but there are funds that have been brought to St. Louis, right? And I think, Heather, you kind of touched on it a little bit that we have money, but it's kind of like, what are we doing with it? How you know you're doing it right is by engaging people, like people who live here, right? If you don't need another park in your neighborhood, tell them, I see in your plan, this is not, I don't need this, right? Like we are the ones who know what's right because it's our neighborhood, and it's not going to always placate. It should not always placate to one group or the other. There should be, again, a middle that caters to an opportunity to support people who are here now, support the growth and education factor, provide provide health, right, longstanding, while also moving us towards the future. As Dr. Criss was talking about, we keep spending more time looking at the past, that's all we're going to keep doing. And frankly, I'm trying to live a little bit longer, so if we can just keep moving forward, it'd be great.
Thank you. We just have just a couple minutes left, and I think we've got such great enthusiasm. I challenge everybody who's been with us today to go and do something with this. You know, talk to your alderperson, talk to your council member, you know, connect with a city official or a government official of some kind. I think it was Heather put in that the Missouri Coalition for the Environment has great talking points on all these issues. All of our panelists have so much more to share. Their bios are on the Focus website, the announcement for this event. We do have a, let's see, we have a completion of a survey, ARPA survey. I'm not sure what that is, but Heather, Leah's nodding her head. So is that with the county survey? Yeah. So if you're a St. Louis County resident, yeah, American Recovery Funds, please do. I also want to say we have a couple of local journalists, Tony Messenger in particular, who's really positioned our awful floodplain management here well. So I think it's also good to give him a shout out, you know, give props to people who are really raising these issues and raising these challenges. They need to know that we support them and really appreciate the work we're doing. Dr. Criss, I haven't given you an opportunity to say anything. Do you have any last words of wisdom for us before you mount your national campaign?
No, not national campaigns for me. I've just enjoying what I do and studying the natural world. But I do want to redouble the point that Heather made, that wisely spending our infrastructure funds is one of the most important things we can do right now. And on that, one of the things that really would benefit people and be of great strategic importance to the United States in a time when we're once again seeing our energy, fossil fuel energy supplies are threatened and prices going up. Why aren't we helping people to get solar panels on their roofs? You know, if you think about it, in the summer, I run an air conditioner to cool my house off, so I'm burning electricity. I run a water heater to heat water. I run my attic fan to throw heat out of the house. And at the same time, you know, if I want to take a shower, I burn natural gas to warm the water. So I'm busy throwing heat away using fossil fuel energy. Then I use more fossil fuel energy to make a little heat. It's just so stupid. We don't even try. We don't even try to design our homes and design our energy infrastructure in ways that would really benefit people. There is so much we can do that would really benefit people with our money if, again, we would be more forward-looking. And those are the points that Heather was trying to make as well, that we have a great opportunity now, and throwing the money backwards isn't what we need to be doing.
That's a great tagline. Throwing the money backwards is not what we need to be doing. Thank you so much. Well, I just want to take a moment and thank all of our panelists. And this has been a really powerful conversation. I know I have learned a lot. I've been really excited about this energy, and just really want to congratulate all of you for the incredible work that you're doing. Keep on keeping on. You have a whole bunch of cheerleaders here listening to you and supporting you. Really much appreciated. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it back to Wally now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Louise. And thank you so much, Bob, Leah, Erica, Heather. This has been a super rich conversation. I love the stuff that I'm seeing in the chat. I'm going to save that. If anybody wants that info, email me, because there's lots of great connections in there. So, and especially that county ARPA funds survey. That's something you can do instantly right now. for the feedback. That's super important. So I would really want to say thank you, especially to Louise, for agreeing to moderate today. We very much appreciate your enthusiasm, your knowledge, and your fantastic leadership today. And our panelists, all of your knowledge is clearly so deep that we could have spent the rest of the day exploring all of this. And I'm sorry to everyone whose questions we didn't get to, but I am going to wrap it up here. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our participants. And I just have a few housekeeping things here at the end. I want to mention again, these forums are made possible by the support of our sponsor, the Incarnate Word Foundation. They are also made possible by memberships in Focus St. Louis. So if you like what you saw here today, you want to hear more, you want to see more of these kinds of conversations, go to focusstlouis.com and become a member. We'll make sure to keep you updated. Put May 12th on your calendar for What's Right with the Region in person once again. And with that, thanks to everybody for an incredibly lively, informative conversation. And I will hand you back the rest of your day. You are over the hump. It's after 12 o'clock on Wednesday. You're on your way downhill to Friday. So hopefully you have a good rest of the week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.